Nancy?
Yes.
Nancy, you were going to do the recap of the 10 lessons, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, just making sure we decided that. I just want to make sure.
You bet.
Okay, we are recording and we can go to the next slide. Hi, everyone. Welcome to AAISP webinar series 10 lessons from 1 million cold calls. My name is Bob Perkins. I'm with the AAISP, the Global Inside Sales Association. We can go to the next slide. Today's topic, really exciting to talk about cold calls. In fact, lessons learned from 1 million cold calls. We're going to hear things like, what's the best length of a cold call? What are some key phrases that we can use? So get ready to take notes. As a reminder also, if you have a question or a comment, go down to the chat button and just chat in a comment. And if you're an attendee, you can also just reply to those comments as well. We'll do our best to get to as many as we can. Well, I'm excited to have a couple of great individuals with us today, and I'd like to go ahead and welcome Nancy Narden, who is the founder of Smart Selling Tools, and also the co-founder of Vendor Neutral, a company and a group that has worked quite a bit with the AISP. Nancy, welcome.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
It's good to have you. And then Natalie Severino, who's the VP of Marketing at Chorus.ai. Chorus is also a sponsor, a partner of the AISP. In fact, we'll be seeing you out as the title sponsor at our Dallas event in June. Natalie also, in addition to marketing, has responsibility of managing the BDR team, so wearing lots of hats, but you come with the experience of having observed lots of prospecting calls, so we can't wait to hear some of your tips and tricks. So with that said, let's get ready for a great topic on best practices and things we can learn about cold calling. Let's go ahead and get started.
Thanks, Bob. Just giving you guys a quick roadmap of our agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about what is your return on investment from cold calling? Why is it important? Then we're going to get into 10 lessons that we've learned through analyzing 1 million cold calls that has been run through the Chorus platform. We're going to build on that knowledge to talk about how you create your cold calling script, and we're going to talk about how you integrate cold calling into your outreach process. So just to kick it off and be a little controversial right up top, Nancy, what do you think? Does cold calling still work?
Well, I want to say, yes, it does. And then, no, it doesn't, because that is one of the most controversial subjects these days, and people are opinionated. So you'll find lots of comments and articles and arguments even on LinkedIn and other places about this. But the real answer is yes. Smart Selling Tools took part in a survey that we did with Discover.org, as you can see here, that 55% of high growth companies, those with at least 40% growth, so that's a lot of growth, 40% growth over the last 3 years, they identified cold calling as one of their key strategies. So that's pretty significant. However, it also means that 45% didn't view it as a key strategy. But that, again, doesn't mean that it didn't work. It may just mean that the other 45% said that it wasn't a key strategy, but maybe they still use it as well. And then here we can see that on the flip side, companies say that cold calling is outdated, drove 42% less growth. So there's a correlation for sure, and this number is pretty shocking, but it doesn't mean that their attitude toward cold calling caused the slow growth. Right? So it could be correlated, but it doesn't mean it necessarily caused it. It could be, hey, they have the wrong attitude or the wrong culture or the wrong approach on a lot of things, not just cold calling. So is there a definitive yes or no? I think there is, and it is yes, it does work, but it's also a matter of what do you sell? Is it high transaction, short sales cycle? Is it a longer term? How else can you get in front of those people? So there's a lot of variables to think about, but don't throw cold calling out for sure.
I absolutely agree. I mean, I know that cold calling has gotten harder. It's definitely gotten harder, but there's no doubt that it is more impactful when you can have a conversation with someone and you're more likely to be able to take that next step. And it just means that we have to get smarter in our approach to making those calls, which we're going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, on that theme, cold calling definitely has changed. There's a need for you to be more personalized. And that means that you've got to do your research. You've got to dig in and understand a little bit. It's not that you need to spend tons of time, but what kind of business are they in? Who are their competitors? What kind of problems are they trying to solve? And then you need to take a highly integrated approach. It's not just cold calling. What other channels are you bringing into your communication? And now there are AI-driven insights that can be had so that you can really hone and refine your script by knowing what actually works and what converts.
Yeah, and I'm just going to throw in here that that last part is really key, because we're all asking ourselves if cold calling works. And the question is, how do you know? How do you know if it works? Right? If you're a manager, I guess suppose what you could say is, are our reps hitting their quota for appointments or for the number of phone calls? But that doesn't really say how effective you are. So how do you know if it works? You have to be able to analyze it and understand what's actually happening on calls, and then what works and what doesn't work.
Definitely, and we're gonna talk a little bit about that later in the session, which I can't wait for. So one of the things that we wanted to bring to this group is we took and we analyzed 1 million cold calls that were done through the Chorus platform, and we extracted some lessons that we thought would be great to share. So one of those lessons is around cold call length, and this in and of itself can be a bit of a controversial topic, but hang out with me here for a second. What we found through analyzing all those calls is that the most successful calls on average were about 7.5 minutes. So you could take that as, you know, the longer the better. I want to talk about that a little bit more. What I will do first is just contrast that most cold calls were only about 80 seconds long, and the most successful cold calls were 7.5 minutes long. I think that, you know, first and foremost, your job on a cold call is not to actually give the whole pitch. It's to have enough of a interaction with someone, uncover that there's a pain or a need, and to get to the place where you're able to kind of book that next meeting. So I wouldn't say the longer the better in absolute. Again, that to Nancy's point earlier, it really depends on your business. Is it a transactional sale? Is it a consultative sale? What industry are you in? How long is the sales cycle? All of those context pieces matter. But the thing to take away is, if you don't have enough of an interaction with the prospect, you're going to have a hard time getting them to show up to the next meeting, is my point of view. What do you think about that, Nancy?
Well, I think it's really interesting. I'm a little shocked that it's 7.5 minutes long, but keeping in mind that that 7.5 minutes cannot be the salesperson doing all the talking. First of all, I wanted to ask you, what does it mean that it's a successful call? So 7.5 minutes on average equals average successful call. How is success being measured in that instance?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we took anonymized data from our customers to look at those 1 million cold calls. And one of the things that is a critical component of the Chorus platform is we integrate in with Salesforce. That allows us to do a lot of things for our customers, like correlate talk tracks to different sales stages, correlate talk tracks to whether or not a deal closed won or not. And so when we were looking at this, we identified a successful cold call as one that progresses to the next step. there's another action that happens after, there's another meeting that happens after? That's a great question.
Okay. So in other words, this is anonymized across all, and I keep wanting to go 1 million, right? 1 million cold calls. It's anonymized over all of those. So the important thing is for each company to figure out what is their ideal length of a successful call. You can't just assume it's going to be 7.5 minutes. You have to know for yourself, and the way to do that is to, have some way to measure that. The other thing I was going to, you mentioned it depends too on what the goal is. That the goal isn't typically to talk about, your product and do the pitch. So if the goal of a cold call, which I think is normally the case, is to get an appointment, then the question I would ask is, how does that jive with what is now the normal measurement? In other words, how many calls can we make? Should that be the metric, or should managers be using a different metric of success? Maybe it should be the length of a call.
Or, ultimately, I think, at least from my point of view, I'm always about quality over quantity. And so for me, it's how many conversions am I getting? If it takes 7.5 minutes to drive a qualified meeting for an AE, I will take 10 of those versus 180-second calls that don't convert every day of the week and twice on Sunday. And that's part of why I have a great relationship with my sales team, and they trust me to take their prospecting on through our BDR team. Does that make sense?
It does. That's a good point. And I always wonder, when we talk about volume, sales is a volume game, it's a numbers game. So how many phone calls can you make? Well, or how long can you talk? Maybe the question should be, how few phone calls can you make?
I really like that, Nancy. I wanted to just jump in and say, metrics have changed. If you still think lots of calls yields, to Natalie's point, conversions, you're wrong. Right? One of the reasons is years ago, people had a phone, and we would get 20% pickup rates. Today, it's 3 to 4%, right? So the pickup rates are so few that when you do have that, it's got to be high quality. So I totally agree with both of the things you said. In fact, we just had a comment here in the Q&A, which I'll throw out to the two of you, and that is, you need a good hook, something that grabs attention right away in the call. And I like to call it what Natalie showed or Nancy showed earlier, hyper-personalization. If somebody calls me and says, hey, Bob, I saw you speak at Chicago 2 weeks ago. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Tell me more. What are your thoughts on that? The first beginning of a call with this hook or this personalization?
Well, I know we're going to be talking about personalization here in just a second, and that's a great way to personalize. But one hook that I think works really well, and I put this in the cold call lessons ebook that Natalie and Chorus put out. And the statement I said is, lead with, hi, it's Nancy Nardin. Can I have 20 seconds to tell you why I'm calling? And boy, I got some hate mail. Not literally hate mail, but kind of hate mail, right? Nah, that will never work. And if you did that to me, I would hang up on you. Well, come to find out that technique has been proven out by data. Chris Beal at Connect and Sell says that actually what they recommend is to say, hi, it's Nancy Nardin. Can I have 27 seconds of your time to tell you why I'm calling? And the 27 is just enough to sort of throw them off and make them curious. But I think the point that I want to make is that you're going to react viscerally to your own biases, right? So just like the person who said, that's a terrible idea. Well, maybe it is in your industry. So the point is you have to try things and you have to learn what works for you. And you can't assume that just because you don't like it, that it doesn't work.
And Natalie,
absolutely.
On a similar note here, a question came in. If you could comment, it said, what was on those million calls, right? What is a typical connection rate? Is it really that low, 3 or 4%, or is it higher, or do you have that at your fingertips?
I don't, because we, in the course platform, we're not actually making the calls. We're taking the recordings from your telephony, and then we're analyzing the calls. So that I don't think is something that we looked at in the research. I guess if that's logged in Salesforce, we could, and that's something I'd be happy to talk to the team about looking at, but not something that I could comment on. But the thing that I did want to comment on, Bob, is one of the things that we like to talk about that related to your comment about the personalization, which again, we will talk about more. You only have one shot. If you make a cold call and you don't do that personalization, if you don't take the time to do a little bit of research to connect with somebody on the phone, it's not going to convert. And you're going to have lots of those short calls where people are like, I really don't have time for this.
Yep.
All right.
Sure. And the research shouldn't take forever either. You should be able to, don't turn it into a project. I mean, just look for things,
exactly.
Figure out what you can look for that will be those hooks.
Yes, definitely. And one of the ways that you can extend that length of that call is by asking some open-ended questions to your prospect. So Nancy, I'd love to hear you talk about what are some of the best open-ended questions from your point of view?
Yeah, so I struggle with this a little bit, because if you're making a cold call, at what point can you switch to open-ended questions? I don't think you can lead with those because you haven't earned the right yet. They don't know whether or not they want to talk to you. And so the open-ended questions, which are typically discovery type questions, right? So don't lead with them, but if you can extend it into a 7.5-minute call, then certainly you're going to have an opportunity to make some open-ended questions. And some of the questions that I like are, what's the most important priority to you? And maybe that comes after you've given a few examples of what some of your clients already are dealing with. And then when you're getting them to talk, you can get them to expand on it. What other issues are important to you? What would you like to see improved? How do you measure that? And I think one of the most powerful open-ended questions is what else? Because what happens is we get the prospect talking and then we get all excited, and so we want to immediately go into, well, how we can solve that. But don't do that, because that might have just been the first thing they thought of. They might have lots of things to mention. So you want to say, what else? And then what else after that, right? I mean, obviously you don't want to be annoying, but there's a way to do that so that you get them thinking about it. Well, I guess I'd also say this. And then you can say, well, how would you prioritize those? And then, your typical questions like, can you help me understand that a little better? Or what does that mean? Or how does that process work? Those are all good open-ended questions.
I agree. And I think part of the point is that you want to be able to, I think you're right, you can't start there, but you need to get there. You want to actually have it be a two-way conversation. One of the other things that we looked at in the data is, what does a cadence look like? And what we found was that it took like four calls over the course of 20 days in order to get somebody to actually pick up the phone. And listen, I'm a VP of marketing. I get prospected into all the time. My inbox is full. My voicemail box is full. And I think for me, one of the big takeaways here is that, persistence at the end of the day is something that you have to be prepared for. And the people that are successful breaking into me personally have that balance between voicemails, phone calls, and emails, so that they have a couple of ways that they're able to give me a taste of what they do, so that then I can decide whether or not I'm ready to pick up the phone. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that resonates with you, Nancy, but that's kind of my own experience.
It does. And I would say to people that if you are the one making cold calls, it's real easy to start to think negatively, like, gosh, I'm really bugging this person. But if you have figured out that person is the right one to contact, so you've done your job there and you are sending out the right messaging, then don't worry about that, because that's just literally what is required these days. And in fact, I think it's always been required, that you have to be persistent. It's just what the world takes now, that the world that we live in, it just takes that many.
Yeah, I've actually
Yeah.
taken meetings just to reward a salesperson for their persistence.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's somebody that I've bought stuff from before in the sales space that is just masterful at that. If he thinks that there's an opportunity, he doesn't let it go until he at least gets to have the conversation and gets the hard no. So that would be my best advice.
Yeah, and I just, oh yeah, go ahead, Bob.
No, go ahead, Nancy. Finish your thought,
Well,
then I'm going to get to the audience.
I just wanted to say that we can't think of, if we think of cold calling still as the volume thing, and I've got a list and I'm going to go through the list and I'm just going to call one after another, that I don't think works today.
Right.
Because you could be calling people that are never going to buy from you. I get people calling me, you know, from large corporations that think I'm an enterprise. I'm never going to buy what you have to sell. So why are you wasting your time calling on me and annoying me? So just make sure that you are calling on a good list, and that you know why you're calling, and that you can be personalized to some degree. Find a hybrid between that volume versus you know, knowing why, knowing the reason why.
We have like lots of tactical questions, a whole bunch here. So I wonder if we can fire through a few of these and still get through the material. So one was, you know, in the beginning of a call, do you want to make sure it's not a bad time? Should you always say, hey, I think, do you have 27 seconds? That, to me, if they say yes, that's permission to go, right?
That's right.
If you don't use that in the opening, hey, it's Bob, I see you spoke at a conference. Do you have a moment? Do you believe in seeking permission in some way to continue versus, bam, barging in and going, and even if you sense somebody's busy? Your thoughts, Natalie?
You know, if our team has a similar but different way that they throw people off for a second, but then seek permission, which is they ask, did I catch you at the worst possible time? And so it usually takes people a second, like, oh, well, no, yeah, okay, let's chat for a minute. You know, I think it depends on who you're calling into. If you're calling into somebody at an executive level and you try and barge right through, it's a turnoff. For me, it's a turnoff. I think that people expect you to be respectful of their time, and if they, I think they appreciate the permission to go, and if they don't have time, at least then you get a signal of, hey, I need to follow up with this person. Maybe this is the right time to send an email or to do something on social media, and try and find a time that works for them.
Yeah, that's great. Nancy, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, again, I just warn people, don't not do what you think is annoying just because you think it's annoying, because maybe it works. But here's something that I think annoying and it doesn't work for me, and that is to say, oh, hey, you know, hey Nancy, how are you?
Right.
Yeah. Go away. I'm busy. I don't
you?
even know who you are. I don't, you know, why are you calling me? Or, you know, do you have time to talk? No, I don't have time to talk. Or I don't know, because you haven't told me why you're calling me yet. So that is just a waste of words, in my opinion.
But if I said, Nancy, I noticed your new release on vendor neutral and found it interesting on selecting technology, you're going to take that call because it's personal.
Absolutely.
Here's another one that came in. This is a really good one. And I'd ask you both to comment on, listen, you can cold call on the phone. You can also cold mail through LinkedIn, right? It's a type of cold calling. It just doesn't have to be voice to voice. It's, you know, keyboard to keyboard. And do you think that's okay, or do you think that's a turnoff or not? And if it's not a turnoff through LinkedIn, how do you position it so it isn't a turnoff? That's a great question.
Yeah, The whole LinkedIn thing is very interesting. It is cold calling in a way. It's just a different version of, it's not really calling, but it's cold outreach. And I've noticed that if someone sends me an email, I might glance at it really quickly. But if someone sends me a connection request, and in that connection request, it says, hey, it's basically a cold call. My name is Nancy Narden, and the reason I'd like to connect with you is because, we've helped Cisco do X, Y, Z, and I want to tell you how we did that. Would love to connect. Right. So I would read that, and now I know, well, they're not just burying or disguising a connection request with a sales call. They're telling me that this is why they want to connect, and I can make a decision on that. That, to me, I think, is a good approach.
I agree.
I might not connect with them, but I think it's a good approach.
But they're putting a step forward.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, Natalie.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, don't connect with me and then immediately hit me up with that pitch. Because what I do is I just unconnect from you again. That's it. So sorry, Natalie.
Yeah, no. I think that was a great point, and I've seen questions and things going around about that very thing. I think that it's an opportunity for you to lead with, again, understanding and personalizing. What do you know about this person's business, and how could you help? And so do you have a good enough message in that they're going to, agree to connect with you versus, if somebody sends me a connection request on LinkedIn and I don't know them and there's no indication for why they want to connect with me, I never accept those invites ever.
There's no excuse today, none whatsoever. 30 years ago, we had an excuse, right? But today, there's no excuse not to know the basic, what they do, their title, their role, how they do it, and if we're not using that today, shame on us, right?
Yep. Hey, Bob, can I just tell, I have an example here of and by the way, there's so many examples of good, or advice of good, email content and cold call content out there, and a lot of it is not good. So how do you know what's not good? Again, you have to test it. And certain things work for you as a salesperson and won't work for your colleague next to you. So there's a lot of experimentation, but don't just trust everything. But let me just read this real quickly. My name is Eric from XYZ, and the reason I'm calling, now this is a cold email. The reason I'm, why does it say email here? I guess it would be a call. The reason I'm calling is that I noticed you were hiring new SDRs from, say Oregon. You're most likely hiring to solve the problem of needing more meetings. And I wanted to let you know that we offer a prospecting platform designed to get your current team more qualified meetings. It would be worth a 10-minute chat to see if we're a fit before you take your next interview. So I love how they tied that in. Now, and you can argue that, well, it's not perfect, or, it goes against certain rules, but I think that's a pretty decent example of an email.
If I'm a manager and I'm pressed to fill 5 seats and somebody says, hey, I see you're trying to, hire people on board, I'm going to keep reading that. I may not respond, but I'm not going to just not read it.
Yeah.
Hey, we're down to a few minutes, so I apologize. We kind of had so much activity. Let's go ahead and plow through this. Please stay with us if you can. If you have to jump off the webinar, we understand, but there's a lot more good stuff in store. So let's get going here.
So Nancy, you are the tools expert, and I think that people often want to know what are the best cold calling tools. What would you recommend?
Well, there are a lot of great tools out there that can help, and smart selling tools, that's where I got our name, right? Because this is what we do, kind of track the whole entire sales technology space. For cold calling, I would say that, you've got, I mentioned Connect and Sell. So if you've got, a lot of leads, thousands of leads, then that is something you want to use. That they tee up the call for the rep and the rep just picks up the phone. It's not one of those things where, you know, you hear a call connection and then you say, hello, it's Nancy. Hello, click. Hello, is Nancy there? You know, I mean, that's not good. So if you've hired a service like that, listen in and make sure that that's not happening on your calls. Connect and Sell it doesn't happen with. Another tool that I like is Outreach. Outreach allows for the cadences. We talked about the cadences, being able to coordinate a voicemail here and then an email and etc. So they allow reps to do that. Mixmax is another one that does that. They do that even if you don't have like Salesforce. It works right within Gmail. I would say VanillaSoft is another one. I like them because they have a next they have a queue. So it serves up the next call automatically. You don't have a whole long list. You just get who's the next one I should be calling and what should I be saying to them. And then of course I've got to mention Chorus, right? Because without Chorus, you don't know how any of this stuff is working or when you're actually engaging with a prospect. And as Natalie said, you have to make that count. We don't get extra at-bats in this business. When you get that person on the phone, it has to work. And if it's not working, you have to know that it's not, and you have to know why it's not. So that definitely is another tool that I recommend for anyone that's making phone calls to prospects or customers.
Oh, thanks, Nancy. So one of the things that we learned is that successful cold calls do actually include 4 to 5 engaging questions. So we asked about those open-ended questions, and it actually does include discovery and qualification. Obviously, that's not the place that you're going to lead from in the call, but if you're able to get somebody on the phone and engaged with them, there's an opportunity for you to get them to open up a little. And, you know, I encourage the BDRs on our team to do that, because then they're going to be able to set their AEs up for success on the next call, because they're going to know a little bit about what problems that company is trying to solve. Maybe it's something around their tech stack. Is there a good integration? What else would you suggest, Nancy?
So I would suggest, and I'm flipping through papers here because I printed out some good and bad examples, but so one of the things I would not do, what is not an engaging question is, and this, believe it or not, is recommended. I got this off a cold calling website. I noticed you used to work at past company. How did you find the culture there? I mean, what does that have to do with why you're calling? I, as the recipient, know what the culture was like. Why do I need to tell you about it? It's doing no value for me. So that is not a good way to go. But as I mentioned, you know, the one trick about, can I have 27 seconds to explain why I'm calling? It shows authority. It shows you appreciate their time. It shows all kinds of things. Is that you could lead with a stat and then ask a question. So maybe it's a recent CSO Insight study showed that, you know, less than 50% of reps hit their targets. At the same time, quotas are going up. Clearly, companies struggle with the need to hit higher and higher targets. How does that fit with what you're seeing? Something like that. You know, throw out a stat that can be helpful for them and lets them know that you've got information that you can share, that it might be worth a conversation.
Love that. So one of the things that we looked at in these calls was talk time. And one of the things that we found was that the prospect asks 2 to 3 questions. The rep only is going to talk 40 to 49% of the time on the call. So that goes back to that engaging two-way conversation. And a rep monologue is only usually 35 seconds. So when we talk about that 7.5-minute call, it's not you giving a 7.5-minute pitch and then holding your breath and waiting to see if, you know, somebody's interested in taking the next meeting. You've got to make it engaging. It's got to be a two-way street. It's important, you know, as I said, like you're helping to do some of the qualification for the next step, and you're also helping the prospect decide whether or not they want to give you more time. You've got to earn that right. And so that may be including them asking you some questions. And so
Natalie,
Nancy,
sorry,
yeah, go ahead, Bob.
yeah, if you could back up 1 second, I think this is such a compelling. These are best practices, right, Natalie? The 40 to 49% are the best in class. And is it not true? And I know the answer, but I want to hear from you. Is it not true that the majority of SDR, BDRs out there are talking 50, 60, sometimes 70% of the time? Is that the case?
It is.
Not on
It is
your team,
absolutely the case. Not on our team,
No.
and not on, and quite frankly, not on our customers' teams, because it's one of the things that that our platform will measure, and so it's an easy way for sales reps to quickly learn how well they're doing engaging the prospect. Just last week, I was down at UTD with Dr. Dover and talking with his students that are using the Chorus platform. And one of the fascinating things is that's one of the things that they absolutely hone in on. And when they start as a student, they're doing an 80–90% talk time, and they manage over the course of the curriculum to get themselves down into this range. And it makes a difference. It really makes a difference. If a student can do it, you can do it.
And I've heard hundreds, and to do that, you have to stop yourself and revert back to what the prospect just said. Ask another question and go deeper. Let them talk.
Yes.
Good.
Absolutely.
I will just add that this doesn't just pertain to cold calls, because I'll use Chorus when I have conversations with customers, and the same thing goes. I don't want to be doing all the talking. And it mortifies me if I look at the little, graphs on at the bottom and I realize, holy crap, I did most of the talking. Well, what's that going to do for me? It's not going to give me any good information on my customer. It's not going to help them, because you don't learn by being told things. You learn by being asked questions. And so it's not just for cold calling. It can be really great for in the middle of the pipeline as well.
Absolutely. So, Nancy, what kind of questions do you think reps should be prepared to answer?
Well, that's a good question. I think it's obviously going to be different for everyone, but certainly the prospects are going to want to ask questions about the product and price. They may, right? Because they don't really know what else to ask, and you haven't given them any chance because you've caught them by surprise, and so they're not prepared. So I always suggest think about what questions they should be asking, and then help them think through those. But also write down, what do you think the questions will be, or what kind of questions am I getting all the time? That's another good reason to have an analytics solution based on recorded calls, because you can learn that information quickly. Well, we're getting these questions all the time. We should be prepared to answer those. And answering them doesn't mean just answering them. It means answering them and then using it as a way to get your objective, which is usually to get a meeting. But here are some of the best questions that or what you could say to someone that you're talking to is, you know what, some of the best questions that I'm asked when I have calls like this is, how do your customers measure ROI? What is the expected ROI? How is your solution going to help me build a better business? What are the people and processes necessary to extract value? So these are the questions I'm prepared to answer. Can we schedule a 30-minute call as the next step? Because I think if, as a person that just took a cold call and you've gotten me to talk and you've gotten me to answer questions, and then you've just indicated to me that you're prepared to answer these very good questions, some of which I may not have thought about, then that tells me, one, what's going to happen on that 30-minute call, and two, that call is most likely going to be worth my time.
Yeah. I also think that as you learn what those common questions are, one of the things that we've found that's important is you have signals that you give on how confidently you're answering those questions based on your tone of voice, how quickly you answer, does your rate of speech stay the same? And if you guys are interested in that, there's a whole blog on our on our website that's about objection handling that goes into some of those aspects. I would encourage you to take a look, because ultimately if somebody asks you about pricing or asks you about a competitor, you shouldn't be stumbling over those answers. Those are things that you should be prepared for, and you want to be confident in the way that you answer.
Yeah, that's a great point. But it makes me think of something that I see reps do all the time, and that is as soon as a customer asks a question, then that goes into the repertoire of what the sales rep says, automatically, proactively. And so the next call they make, they say, oh, and we also do this, blah, 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 and here's how we do it, blah, blah, blah. And so pretty soon, and then you get asked another question, and then you build that in automatically. And so pretty soon what you've done is you've taken away the ability for a prospect to ask any question whatsoever. And you've just, vomited all this information on them that they're not ready to receive yet. So it's important, let people ask the question. You don't have to answer it proactively. So think about which questions you want to not answer and let them be sure to ask.
I'll just say one more thing on that, Nancy. I 100% agree. And I would say also you should think about, depending on what the question is, how are you going to peel the onion on that? I mean, not that you want to answer a question with a question, but it might be, well, tell me more about that. Why are you interested, and how can I best frame this for you, just to make sure that the prospect also feels heard.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. And then again, you made me think of something else with that comment, and that is that when they ask a question, often we want to say, oh yes, as a matter of fact, and then you go into explaining why your solution is so great for them. And just back off, answer that question, or say, I love that question. I get asked that question a lot, and maybe even see if you can get them to ask more questions. So that's obviously important to you. What else is important to you?
I like that. I like that approach. Really, when you think about that, what's the goal? You both started with this in the beginning. What's the goal of a prospecting call? To further that conversation, whether it's a meeting with a sales executive or a second meeting. And if the more you dig deeper into their comments and go a level deeper, that develops, trust and credibility. You pitching what your product can do for them too early does the opposite. So I totally agree. Let's, we're about 10 minutes past the hour. Once again, if you joined us, thanks a lot. Couple of reminders. These slides will be sent out to the attendees, those unable to attend, also posted on the AISP website, so you can get that. There was one question that came in, Natalie, and it was earlier you showed something around some key phrases. Were there some words, phrases, terms that you wanted to mention that would be associated with a successful call outcome?
Words, phrases associated with a successful call outcome.
I'm not sure where the question referred to an earlier slide. I'm sorry, just getting into it now.
I'm thinking of one that I remember reading in some of your research, Natalie, which is that the use of I words or we words or you. So I think it's important to be talking about you and our customers and not be we this, we that.
We this, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the other things is that if you can dig in a little bit, and it's hard, blending kind of a cold call versus the general meeting. Ultimately, what we're trying to get to is further the conversion. And part of what we need to understand, and it may not be in this first call, is, Nancy brought up, what would a good ROI look like for your customer? And it's both the customer and it's the actual person that you're talking to as well. Depending on what you're selling, what is it going to mean to the person that you're talking to? And do you have a good understanding of actually what a good next call looks like for them and what they hope to get out of it if they're agreeing to a next meeting? I think it's important to ask.
Agreed.
Are we going to go a few more minutes? I mean,
Yeah,
we still have a bit more. Okay.
We still have quite a few sticking with us. If you have to go, we understand, but we'll go ahead
I'm
and
good.
get through the slides.
too.
Yep.
So one of the things that I think, you know, we've all seen is that social proof is becoming so important. When people are considering in this process, is this something that I want to consider? One of the things they want to know is, are other people like me or other companies like me doing this? Is this something that's solving problems for them? Is it working for other companies like me, or is it solving a similar problem that I have? And so one of the things, you know, if we go back to a successful monologue is no more than 35 seconds. Nancy, how do you think we structure a customer success story for a cold call versus something that's further down in the sales process?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I think what you don't want to do is say, well, we've helped companies like yours. That's meaningless. And it shows you just are lazy and you haven't done your homework, and I'm not interested because you didn't take the time. So when I think it should have three pieces to it. It should say the company of name of a reference or a case study, and if you can't say the company name, you know, one of the world's largest telecom companies, right? So it should have the company name. It should have the what their result was, what the outcome was, and the degree of the outcome. So you might say, you know, HP shortened their time to opportunity cycle and acquired 1.2 million in pipeline within 5 months. So, you know, that would be a pretty concise statement, and I think it would drive interest. Yeah. And then you can ask an open-ended question. Maybe you ask, you know, if you experience those results, how would that impact your ability to hit targets? Or imagine how that would impact your ability to hit targets. Can we schedule a call so I can tell you how they did that?
Way to string the concepts together, Nancy. That's why you're the best.
I love this is subtle, but notice she said we can have a discussion on how they achieve that. We call that peer voice, not let's schedule a call so I can show you how our platform can help you achieve that. Mm-hmm. She keeps
That's
it
that
off.
We thing.
Instead of we, it's they. Yeah. That's very good.
Okay, so we wanted to dive a little bit into the overall cold calling script. And I think, you know, when you're thinking about a call, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, and some of the in-between pieces that we talked about. So in that beginning, as we talked about, you know, who you are and why you're calling, and are they okay to take the call with you, and do you know who they are and what's important to them is all kind of part of your intro. You're going to have a very short and concise pitch that's in there where you're kind of sharing the common issue that can be solved. But really, this is just about how can you add value to them? It's not me, me, me. It's here's what I can do for you. And at the end, you know, you really want to make sure that you get solidified what those next steps are. Can you get to the place where you're able to calendar the next step on the call and make sure that you do that good follow-up in the end? Nancy, what would you add?
Maybe just that, you know, the pitch is really the why. Why should they listen to you? Why should they care about whatever you're calling about, and why should they listen to you about it? So that think about answering those questions in one way or another, and including results that others have had. We just talked about that, but those results also should pertain to the challenges that you think that particular persona has. So it doesn't help if you're talking about something a company was able to accomplish and it's not something, a challenge that person is probably going to have. Yes. And then I guess the other thing I'd say is, plus adding to what we just talked about on the close, right? If you go into your intro including the goal, like, hi, my name is Nancy Norton. Can I have or I'd like to schedule a meeting with you. Can I have 27 seconds to tell you why I'm calling? So now I've acknowledged that I'm interrupting. I've kind of showed, I'm confident, but also respectful of their time. And I've told you already what my goal is. I'd like to schedule a meeting with you. Can I have 27 seconds, etc. And then when you go to do the close, they're already prepared for it mentally. And I think that helps because you said, as I mentioned at the beginning, my goal is to schedule a meeting with you so I can, share with you how HP and others, were able to XYZ. Can we do that for next Wednesday?
That's great. The other thing that this strikes for me, being the head of marketing for Course, we go to a lot of events, and I kind of think of it as the same thing. It's almost like an in-person cold call. You're not trying to demo your solution in your booth. You're trying to schedule that next step. And so I think that that can really apply to live situations also.
Good point.
Yeah. So how do you test and measure your cold call scripts? Nancy's brought this up. I've brought it up. Everybody's situation is a little bit different. Context is everything. I think big data, like looking at 1 million cold calls, is something that can help you look at bigger trends. And then, as we both mentioned, there's the nuance that you need to know about your own business, your own sales cycle, your own situation that you bring into that process. Nancy, what are some of your best tips for test and measure?
Well, I think it's just get out of the habit of just saying, well, my measurement of how well my reps are doing is by just knowing how many appointments they closed. Because then it gets down to just numbers. And it's great, they closed X number and that's all I was shooting for, so I'm happy. Well, what if they could have closed X times 10? I mean, that's really what you want to get to. So in order to test and measure, you have to test and measure. So test different things, figure out what you're going to test, different approaches. Think about some of the things we already talked about, like identifying what are the questions you're likely to be asked, and then how will you respond to that and get in a way that will get them to talk. So think through all of that, how you're going to test it, and then how are you going to measure it. I mean, you can record, anyone can record a call, but if you don't have the analytics to do the analysis of that, then you can't quickly come away with the takeaways, because you need to be able to measure a whole bunch of calls over time. So if you want to test and measure, you have to test and measure.
Yeah, some of the things that we're doing is, we're looking at what are the common objections that happen on a cold call. We're looking to measure what are the words that our target customers use so we can mirror that back to them in the cold call. We also, it's very common for our team to look at what the top performers are doing and seeing what they can mirror off of them. And of course, that's easy for my team because they have an easy way to jump in and do that. But, even if you don't, grab a buddy and do some role play, or go and talk to the person that's the top performer and ask if you can shadow some of their calls and try and learn, what they're doing that really works for them.
Yeah, and I will say, just listening to yourself on a recorded call, you learn so much. When I would experiment and I'd listen back to the recordings and I'd be horrified by the way that I came off. But you don't know because you can't really listen and hear it for yourself. And then you also learn things that, hey, that thing that came out of my mouth, that was perfect. I'm going to use that again the next time.
Yeah. That's great. One of the things we also wanted to kind of dig into a little bit is, what is your voicemail follow-up? How do you construct that message that you're going to leave, or the email that you send? I think most people understand that this whole idea of prospecting has become this multi-channel exercise that I mentioned earlier. It's, sometimes you're going to call and leave a voicemail. Sometimes you're going to call and not leave a voicemail. Sometimes you're going to send an email in between, or you're going to send a message through social media. I think, you know, as I mentioned earlier, the people that I'm most likely to respond to are going to show me that they've done some research on my company, what things we're trying to achieve, because every company broadcasts in some way, shape, or form what their goals are, what their initiatives are, and shows me a little bit about what kind of value they could give to me for me investing my time in them. Is there anything that you would add, Nancy, or do different?
Well, as I'm looking at this example, so this is an email follow-up to a voicemail, and this has to do with the cadences because that's required today to mix it up. First of all, I just want to I want to give a tip. There's a company called Sales Folks. I'm pretty sure it's Sales Folks. Let me just see here because I was just looking.
Sales Folk and
Sales Folk, right, Heather?
Apparently, they're no longer a company, but that's okay. I remember them.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, still
Yeah.
look for Heather Morgan, Sales Folk on LinkedIn, because
Yeah.
you'll find all kinds of great information on what works in emails. So that's her expertise. Maybe she couldn't make a business out of it. I don't know, but she's got great advice on emails. On this particular one, I would say the key is brevity and specificity. This is definitely brief, so that's good. I would change it up a bit. I'd say something like, I'm writing to ask for an appointment. HB shortened their time to opportunity cycle, blah, blah, blah. I'm confident we can do the same for you. I can tell you how they did it in a 15-minute call. What do you say? Now, I know people like to end with, can I schedule 15 minutes next Monday or Wednesday? That way you're assuming it. And to me, that comes off as feeling like, well, you're trying to trick me. But again, you can't take what you think, right? It may work. So test it. Do people reply with a day? If not, then maybe you just say, I can tell you how we did it in a 15-minute call. What do you say? And that's an open-ended question. So it's another technique to try. And then you might also say, P.S., I left you a voicemail as well. So you can ignore that now that you've read this. Because that,
I love that.
Right? So you say, oh, okay, great. Now you've just saved me time. It shows me you're looking out for me. I don't have to sit and listen to that call. Oh, that's right. That's that person that emailed me. And you're kind of tying it in a better way than, I'm following up on the outreach I already left you that you already didn't respond to.
Yeah, that's great. So maybe we've touched on this, but how do you think cold calls fit into that end-to-end outreach process?
I mean, they are an essential piece of it, in my opinion, because in the end, you have, you want to get someone on the phone. And so it's got to be, it's easy to just send a bunch of emails, and there's a lot of tools for that, but even they would recommend don't just send emails, because they don't necessarily work on their own. And if you pick up the phone and you're trying to reach someone, then chances are you might reach them. And so it's got to be a central part of your cadence.
I agree. I absolutely agree. I think that, it's interesting because in this world, all those things that were once old become new again. So, it used to be it was all cold calling, and then it was all email, and then email got, saturated. And so now people are experimenting with direct mail. And I think that cold calls is something that's never gone out of style. It may be that it's getting harder, but it's still an essential part of the process, because actually making that connection and having a conversation, I really believe matters. I think this got mentioned by Nancy earlier in the, I skipped, this thing, it keeps skipping slides, so I'm sorry if it's been a bit jumping around, but we did want to do a quick recap.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about a lot, and I'm just it's so awesome that it looks like most of the people were able to stay on, even though we've gone a full half hour over. It just shows you it's just an interesting topic. But some of the things we covered, that the average successful cold call is 7.5 minutes in length. So the longer the better, it appears to be, but I say that with caution because what you ultimately want is just to get that appointment. So you want to have it, the shorter be the better, and figure out a way to make that happen. Most are only 80 seconds long. That's okay if you can accomplish what you want. But if you can't, then you need to be able to figure out how to actually get that prospect to engage. And that's one of the hardest things in sales. Most prospects answer on the fourth call. You have to be persistent. Don't feel like you're being a pest. You are doing them a favor if you really believe what you're doing and what you're selling, and you've done your research and you know that they can benefit because of the kind of company they are or the stage they're at or because they're hiring or whatever the trigger events are. You have to stay persistent as a favor to them as well as yourself. The ideal cadences include 4 to 5 calls over a 20-day period of time. And again, 4 to 5, that is also with emails and voicemails mixed in. Engage prospects with open-ended questions and customer stories. That's very key. Just make sure those questions are ones that they find valuable, not ones that are just empty, trying to build rapport questions. Cold calls should include 4 to 5 engaging questions. And that's engaging is where the prospect is actually talking. So you've got them to really, you can almost picture them looking up at the ceiling going, that's a good question. Let me think about that. So those are the kinds of questions you want to look for. Prospects ask 2 to 3 questions. So if you have a successful call, that means you've been able to get them to engage by asking questions. Reps don't talk more than 50% of the time in general. You want your prospect to be talking as much as you do. And it's okay to have a monologue as long as you don't make it so long that you've eaten up all your 49% at the beginning of the call, let's say, or at the end of the call. You need to spread it out. And 35-second increments is kind of a good rule of thumb. And then last, that cold calls need to be integrated into your end-to-end outreach process. So that's a lot to cover, and it's a big subject, but an interesting one.
Well, that's been fantastic. Thank you both very much. We managed to have most of the attendees stay for a full hour, so sorry we went over, but thank you very much. There was a lot to cover here. What's the best way to reach out to either Natalie or Nancy if any of the participants wants to connect or have a further discussion with you all? Is there a slide for that? I believe we have a contact slide. There we go.
There we go.
Yep. So you can jot that down, and we'd love to talk more about the ability to measure what's working and what isn't is amazing. Before we relied on phone splitters. We only heard, as a manager, I used to hear 1 in 200 calls, and of course some of them weren't very good. But with the tool like Chorus, you capture every single call, and it's quick and easy for a trainer, a leader to find out and listen to when they get a successful outcome. Let's pinpoint some of those words, phrases, how they did it, what's the talk time versus the listen and questioning time. So take a look at that. Reach out to Natalie. Nancy, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, actually there's one. If you go to Chorus or you just go to LinkedIn and say Chorus cold calling, you'll find that ebook that Natalie was showing a second ago. And they actually reached out to a whole bunch of people to get their own tips and advice on cold calling. Right. So I think it's a great resource.
And where was that found again, Nancy? Can you repeat that?
Well, right on Chorus site, or you can,
okay.
I think, Natalie, do you have a
yeah, you can go to Chorus.ai and go to our resource center, and it's under eGuides, and I believe we'll be emailing out a copy to all of the attendees on this webinar.
Great.
There you go.
Great.
Yeah.
Natalie, any final comments for the audience?
I think that I'm just so appreciative that Nancy joined us. She's such a wealth of knowledge, marrying her wealth of expertise with some of the interesting data that we're able to pull out from our platform, I think has been super informative. And one last thing that I'll throw out to you guys is, hit me up on LinkedIn. Make sure that you put a message as to why in your invite. And I'd also love to hear from the audience what other topics you're interested in, because we're going to be planning more of these, and I'd love to bring more data to you to help in your sales process.
Great. Thank you both very much. We appreciate your time. Thanks everyone that joined us for sticking with us. And until next time, everyone, good selling and good prospecting. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Natalie.
Thank you.
Have
Thanks,
a great
Bob.
day,
Thanks,
everyone.
Nancy.